I want to talk a bit about the burden of knowledge. There are different types of addictions in life. Some of them much worse than others, but addiction is, again, I described my definition of it in a previous clip. Addiction is a relationship that you have with a behavior or a substance which is maladaptive, which only takes from you, doesn't give you anything back. An addiction is a relationship where you feel the compulsion to engage in the behavior or with the substance of abuse. It's a substance of abuse, right? This is why drugs are considered substances of abuse, because they abuse you, right? Difficult that you have control over them. They have control over you. So this compulsion and this abusive relationship talks also about the lack of control. And if you think about what do you really have control over in your life, there are very few things. And there are substances, right, which might seem benign on the outside, but because of this maladaptive relationship that you develop with them, they get to keep you locked and force you to engage in compulsive use and only take from you, right? And rob you of your own control and your own agency. One of the recent addictions that I realized I have, and I'm trying to control it as much as I can, is consuming content about my own development and about self-development and personal growth, right? And you would say, come on, man, don't be hypocrite, right? It's not an addiction. This is good. You should be happy that you have this new, this passion, and you have, I just wrote down in my journal recently, in the past 6 years, I wrote down 40 people who influenced my thinking considerably, that they just popped into my mind and I wrote them down, on topics from neuroscience, biology, philosophy, psychology, anthropology, longevity, everything that has to do with one's self-improvement, one's ability to reason with the world at large, to make sense of the world, to understand the reality, to parse reality in a way that is giving them more agency. So 40 people, right? And we are talking about thousands of hours of podcasts, and tens of books. So it was really an addiction, right? So it's an obsession, but with addictive tendencies. And for the longest time, I thought, how lucky I am that I have this addiction. But recently, I realized that I don't like addictions in general. And after I defined, what addiction is, then I realized that having this need, this compulsion to consume content, which, yes, it's helpful, but the very fact that I need to do it is something that I didn't like. And this happened first with food, for example, right? I talked about fasting and multi-day fasting, and from not even imagining skipping lunch to being able to not eat for 3.5 days was, for me, nothing short of absolutely incredible, to be honest. It was revolutionary. I didn't know this is possible. Then, all kind of relationships that we have with substances and behaviors that we engage with routinely, we have to keep them in check, and we have to be very sensitive to the tendencies that we get. Because some tendencies, and for example, working too much, like workaholism, is a thing. But that's also an escape drug for people who don't want to assume and take ownership of their other responsibilities in their lives. But because the society rewards that behavior and people say he's a successful person, right? They work a lot, but they also make a lot of money, so good for you. They basically feel out of this recognition. These people who work endless hours, they feed off of this recognition from the world, and they think this is good. And they neglect their marriages, they neglect their children, they neglect their duties, because they are obsessed to the point of being addicted to the work itself. And I'm not talking about people who are genuinely in love with what they are doing, and this is just rewarding for them, and it makes them happy, and they don't neglect responsibilities towards other people and so on. But those are exceptions, right? The biggest part of people who are workaholics, they just work because that's their escape drug, because they don't want to confront the realities of an everyday life, and they just withdraw into their work because that gives them fulfillment. And when it comes down to work, because that's, reinforced and rewarded by the society, the more you work, the more money and the more results you tend to have, the easiest will be for that person to justify the fact that they have to do it like that, because look at the results. If I were not to work 16 hours a week, you would not, 16 hours a day, you would not have, this situation, or we would not have this lifestyle, or we would not afford all these things, right? But of course, that's just a lame excuse. The very fact that you cannot not work is for me a problem. The very fact that conceptually, at least, right, you cannot help but work, or you cannot disconnect for 3 days or 5 days from doing something, anything, that's a problem in itself. And that applies to food, to alcohol, to work, to everything, right? Now about my addiction to self-improvement content. I actively, first of all, it's all about being aware of it, right? And you might say, okay, but what are you losing, right? Why are you not, what's the problem in the end, right? What's the problem here? Because it looks so good, so positive, that it feels like this is a hypocritical statement, right? I'm addicted to self-improvement content. Well, it's not, because by consuming content, you don't produce. That's the biggest problem. You don't create. When you consume, you don't create. And I actively force myself, in a way, to not consume with the same kind of frequency, because I want to be able to create also stuff on the back of what I'm consuming, right? And this video, for example, is such an example, is such a situation where I'm creating out of what I'm learning. It's much more uncomfortable and effortful for me to create a video than just listen to a podcast on topics similar to the ones that I'm talking about with you. So the ratio for me between consumption and creation should be at least 1-to-1. I'm not there yet. I know that I already have enough knowledge and understanding that I can create without consuming anything for 1 whole year or even more, until I will really feel that I have nothing more to say, nothing more to contribute to this world, and I have now to intake, more content. I need to expose myself to new input, because I just exhausted all my notes, all my insights, all my breakthroughs that I had along the way throughout these 5 years. But I cannot do that. At this point, I cannot say, okay, for 1 year, I will not consume anything. What I can do, however, is say, okay, I have this long run, not that long, but for some people might be long, for some people might be not so long, 11 kilometers in the weekend, where I run at zone 2. So cardio zone 2, 6.5, 7 minutes per kilometer pace, very slow, right? And the very reason why I was able to go running for 1 hour, 1.5 hours, was because I was able to listen to podcasts. I was happy to run if I had my headsets with me and I can listen to something. Now, of course, once the habit is built, the challenge is, can I dissociate this habit of running, which is a healthy habit, from my initial condition of having to have something to listen to necessarily while I'm running? And this is what I call progress, and this is what I call evolution, because of course, now I can do it. And I do it systematically, to the point of occasionally listening to stuff and occasionally not. And typically I tend not to, especially in those times when I feel that I would listen to the most, right? In those times when I have this urge to listen to something, this is the time when I don't do it. Because I want to disrupt basically the reinforcing pattern that when I go running, I have to listen to something. If I always have this urge to listen to something when I go run and I actually do it, then this behavior and this urge will just reinforce itself, right? And it will be much more difficult for me in the future to actually create this disconnect between running and listening to something while I'm running. So now, consciously, when this desire to listen to something, maybe I didn't finish a podcast, or maybe I want to start an interesting audiobook that I heard about. And when I feel this urge, this desire to listen to that thing, and I find this amazing opportunity to run, and I almost want to go to run because I can listen to this, I say, okay, you know what? I don't do it. And I consciously frame this discomfort as a good thing, because I know in the moment when I decide not to do it, that I disrupt this reinforcing cycle of addiction ultimately, which allows me to run without listening to music and be okay with it, because now I reframe it as this kind of success that I have from not giving into my addiction. Do you see how it works? So instead of getting pleasure from listening to the podcast, I'm getting pleasure from my ability to disrupt an arguably addictive pattern of behavior, right? The very fact that I feel the need and the urge to have my headset when I'm running and associate running with headset, it means that these two habits are too intrinsically connected together. And I don't want to depend on having to listen to something in order to be able to run, right? So now, because I'm consciously able to get rewarded from the very fact that I intercepted this tendency, and now I feel good about myself that I'm able to run without listening to the headset, because I know that I'm interrupting an addictive behavior. Now I can use my running time to think about stuff without listening to something, or simply be mindful about my run itself without necessarily thinking to something about something, or anything else which doesn't require me to listening to stuff. And that's such a subtle but so powerful way of not ever getting pulled into a game which with time gets rigged, right? Which gets made against your own will. Even if at the beginning it might feel benign, like all addictions start with a benign, starting condition. When you drink a beer, that's absolutely fine. That's not a problem. When you drink 2 beers, that's absolutely okay. When you drink 3 beers every single day for 3 months, that's a problem. And of course, you don't know when it's happening, right? You don't know when you get addicted to alcohol. You don't know when you became obese and now you cannot control your hunger, and you now have this pathological and disease-like condition and relationship with food. and you find yourself in this cycle of reinforcing the negative behavior, which is just keeping you stuck, right? You never know when it's happening, but it's happening. The brain always defaults to favoring the behavior which gives it the most pleasure in terms of dopamine release, right? And society today is giving us endless possibilities to have dopamine released, which is this molecule of pursuit, of achievement, of pleasure, of getting to pleasure, or getting to that outcome which is pleasurable. Everyone is talking about dopamine detox. Everyone is talking about how you can, detach and disconnect. But this is very hard to do, especially if you are already caught in it. You might understand conceptually what people are telling you, but you are running on autopilot, and you cannot just disrupt this cycle unless you get help, right? And it's unfortunate, but this is what we have to. This is the human condition. And if I learned something that I'm really proud of throughout these 5 or 6 years of digging deep in myself and understanding myself, is this thing, the ability to become aware of my own tendencies and disrupt these patterns that would otherwise gain a lot of momentum and put me in this negative or maladaptive or abusive relationship with a substance or a behavior. And seeing this and choosing consciously to disengage whenever I feel that the urge is, dangerously high to do something, even if it might not look like very important, this ability that I cultivated is for me a superpower. Because it allows me to be honest with myself, be truthful, and have this internal bullshit meter that I can rely on. And when I feel this kind of compulsion to do anything, or to drink, or to eat, or to listen to podcasts, then I know that, okay, this is not okay, this is not good. I should not feel the need to do anything. I should do it because I want to do it, not because I feel the urge to do it, right? But when you feel the urge to do something, when you feel this compulsion to do something, it feels like it comes from you still. That's why you give in. That's why it's so it's so tricky to identify when the relationship becomes maladaptive. When you use the drug of abuse, your substance to reward you and to give you satisfaction, and when do you actually start to create this vicious cycle of addictive behavior? If you don't have this self-awareness and you don't cultivate it, you don't work on it, and you're not willing to challenge yourself and to be truthful to yourself, you will always bullshit yourself and fool yourself into believing that this is not a problem, and that there is nothing wrong with you, and that it's everything okay, and you will find all sorts of interesting narratives that will convince you that everything is all right? Because it's much easier to consider that everything is all right than to confront the pain and the suffering of having to address it, right? At the beginning, and I think it's all about the ability to reframe the reward and get pleasure from being able to stay in control, right? Because at the beginning, in order to create the habit of running, I had to listen to stuff. This is what kept me going. If I would not have had my headsets, I would not have had the motivation to go run. But I said, okay, if I go run, I can listen to something that I want. And I linked the behavior to a behavior that I wanted to develop. But now that the behavior that I wanted to develop is developed, I don't want this crutch anymore. I don't want the podcast crutch anymore, right? So I wanted to separate the two. I still listen to podcasts, I still run, but they should not be linked together, because if they reinforce in this way, I then depend on listening to podcasts to be able to run, and I don't want that. So at the beginning was very difficult, was very painful, because running was for me bad and difficult, and I made it better by listening to stuff. I didn't yet had at the time the ability to frame things differently, right? For me, it was like, I cannot listen to stuff. I don't have batteries on my headset. I cannot go run, right? Very simple, fast, available excuse. All good. I was happy with myself. I knew that I'm going to run because I can listen to stuff. Now I cannot listen to stuff, so I cannot run, of course, right? Of course. But now, as I dug deeper and deeper and deeper, and I see this kind of malicious, in a way, potential of the mind to fool itself and fool us into believing this kind of negative narratives and absurd stories, I now am humble about our inability to see where we are not free ultimately, right? We have this sense of control, that we are always in control, that we always know we have absolutely zero control. We are piloting the best we can an elephant which can never be tamed, right? But we try to make good friends with it. We try to nurture for him. And this is how the mind is. The mind is restless. The mind generates thoughts. Some thoughts are undesirable. But instead of engaging with everything and following every thought and building all sorts of negative thinking patterns, we identify the thoughts as ephemeral appearances in the mind, and we just let them be. If we don't like them, we just let them be. We don't engage with them. We don't resist them. We don't fight them. I don't want to think about that. Guess what? What you resist persists. So don't do that. Let it be. Recognize the mind's inability to only produce the thoughts that you want to produce. Right? This is the human condition. But because you realize how the mind works, now you can skew your odds. You can skew the odds in your favor, in the sense that, okay, the mind needs to take reward from something. The mind needs to get some sort of fulfillment out of something. So I hijacked my own reward pathway in the mind. So now I get dopamine from being able to run without my headphones, because I know that this is a win. I know that this is my ability to keep control over my own life circumstances and not be the victim of my life circumstances. Right? I don't want to be the victim of headphones who don't have battery, in order, to exercise the habit that I feel healthy and I want to continue to do, to execute the running part. And this is, again, it's such a humble experience, and it forces humility throughout life, because you are never really free, completely free. We always have, we have our own tendencies. Some of them are genetic, some of them are cultural, some of them are societal. People contribute ultimately, decisively, most of the time, to us believing stuff to be in a certain way. And then we take those beliefs as the ultimate truth, and that truth ultimately guides our behavior and our life. And it's very difficult to find this middle way in which you can objectively confront your everyday experience, look at it, and be honest with yourself when you analyze it, and see if it's helpful or not, and see where you are not free, and analyze where you are not free. Whenever you feel compulsion to do anything, just be mindful of the experience. Realize that there is something there which has a grip on you. You are not in control. When you feel compulsed, when you feel the urge to do something, you are not in control. It doesn't mean that the outcome of what you are about to do is not optimal or positive, or gives you something beneficial or pleasurable, right? For example, you want to visit a good friend of yours, right? You feel the urge of that, that's perfectly fine. You do it, right? But if this friend, if you know, going out with this friend means that you are always going and drinking 4 beers every single day, then are you going for the beer or for the friend, right? So at some point you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to frame your life experience always against who you want to become ultimately, because this is your source of truth. Who you want to become, what's your purposeful goal, what you want to achieve in life, what kind of model you want to be for the people around you that you care about and you love. And that's the North Star. And that ideal self of yours will always be true to you if you are willing to listen to it. And it will tell you, okay, this is how we roll, right? These are our values. This is what I care about. This is how I want to live my life. Can you help me achieve that? Can you help me build that? And if you are willing to listen, it will always tell you, you will always have access to that you really want in life. And if you really listen, you will realize that most of the time is not about new and more things, about achieving more material possessions. It's about growing into someone who again can look in the mirror and see his own reflection smiling back at him. I think that's the culmination of one's own pursuit to happiness, right? To receive as many smiles as possible from the person in the mirror. Because the person in the mirror is simply your future, right? It's your reflection. It's your future reflection reflecting back at you the happiness that they experience. And you are able to create that for them, right? I hope this helps. I challenge you to analyze your addictions, even those who might not seem negative or maladaptive. Whenever you feel compelled to do something on a regular basis, that's an addiction. And it's worth investigating. It's worth testing if you can go without it and see what's happening. And be truthful to yourself when you analyze the results, right? Because it will help you to navigate life ultimately from today on in a way that feels more in control, where you feel that you get to dictate the relationship that you have with some people, with your own environment. You get to control, you get to dictate, you get to build the kind of life that you want by design, against your own rules, based on your own values, to live the kind of experiences that you want to live on a day-to-day basis in perpetuity.